That lap, Andre, you hit 124 oil engine temp.
Copy. It's the engine temp that's worrying. Still doing some weird shit. It seems like it's also down on power. Wondering if it might be just best to do a cool down lap and call it and have a look at some data. Yeah, so the reason it's down on power is it's running on 3 cylinders.
Shit out of the back of the breather, Andre, shut it down. Nah, she's toast, dog. It's fucked.
This day, D-Day. We've kind of made it. I mean, we're loaded up and we're going to the racetrack with a finished car. Doesn't have aero. May not have a head gasket, we don't know for sure. So it's a bit of a mixed feeling right now. Yeah, we could just be towing a broken race car 2.5 hours to the bottom of the South Island. But we're this far in, so let's do that and we'll see what we've got when we get there. We did it.
We're here for round 1 of the South Island Endurance Racing Championship at Teretonga. It's been a long 4 weeks leading up to this. We've had a few ups and downs over the last few days, including last night at 11 PM when we thought that potentially we had a blown head gasket. It's going to be a long day. We've got a few things to test out and there's a lot of stuff that's still up in the air. Wish us luck.
Here at Teretonga we had some issues with the temperature yesterday during testing. So Andre is just looking at the telemetry now. How's it looking, Andre?
Yeah, so far looking pretty good. Got the engine temperature here, 76 degrees. So far actually haven't seen it do much of anything. Yeah, that's just on low boost. Pretty much if we can just run low boost and get around the track, I'll be happy with that. There's so much work going into it that getting to the finish line is probably more important right now than trying to get on the podium. So Ben has just gone out for the first test session. Obviously we're a bit nervous about this cooling situation. May have overreacted yesterday. However, everyone was running on about 2 hours sleep and it was 11 o'clock at night when we found the potential problem. So we thought it might be a head gasket. It can also be caused by a big airlock in the cooling system, which is heaps better than a head gasket issue. So we decided for this first session to do the best job we possibly could of bleeding up the cooling system, make sure that we've got no air in it. And we did get a fair bit of air out, so we're hopeful that that was going to be the situation. So sent Ben out. He missed the first 10 minutes of the 30-minute session, but still did 20 minutes of laps and pushed reasonably hard towards the end. and the water temperature never went above, I think 79 was as hot as it got degrees C, which is sweet, quite happy with that. That was on the lowest boost setting. I mean, realistically, I think if we can just get the damn car to the finish line, that's probably more important right now than trying to be heroes and actually get a position of placing. So I think we'll try leaving the boost. I'm definitely not going to be going with the party mode. That can be for another day. In this next session, if I'm going to go out, I will try the first boost setting, just because I think we're going to need that to at least be in the field, and we'll see how it goes, see how a 30-minute session unfolds. So fingers crossed. It's looking a little more promising than I thought at 11 o'clock last night.
I've just completed the first session of the day, and it went pretty well. Didn't have water pissing out everywhere. The temperature was controlled. It didn't go over 79 degrees, which was pretty great. The car felt pretty good. The track was still damp, and I only started really pushing at the end there. So it'll be very interesting to see what Andre will jump in and do. Last night at about 11 o'clock, when we found out that there was a potential head gasket issue, or maybe an airlock in the cooling system, I was pretty upset. So to get in the car today and do, I would have done maybe 7 or 8 laps. I felt pretty stoked, and it's real good to be behind the wheel again.
Andre, you've got engine oil temp at 115.
Yeah, that's fine.
Engine temp at 92, slowly increasing. What is coolant temp there?
68. And the pit this lap for a tyre pressure check.
Copy. Backlash is 27, lower. All the rest are 30.
Okay, thanks. Andre, you hit 124 oil engine temp. Copy. It's the engine temp that's worrying. Still doing some weird shit. It seems like it's also down on power. Just wondering if it might be just best to do a cool down lap and call it and have a look at some data. Yeah, so I turned it up to level 2. It seemed okay there. It just slowly lap after lap the temperature crept up. So I turned it back down to 0. And yeah, temperature's all over the place. Okay, so the reason it was down on power is it's running on 3 cylinders.
Shit out of the back of the breather. Andre, shut it down. Nah, she's toast, dog. It's fucked.
Oh, good. Just had my first session out on the track and our worst fears pretty much have just been confirmed. It wasn't an airlock. We've definitely got a problem with the head gasket leaking, and chances are, given the laps that I just put in, we're now running on 3 cylinders, which probably means it's actually torched the head. It's well and truly blown the head gasket at least. So it's not what we wanted to hear, but this is motorsport. It's really disappointing, mainly for everyone who's been busting their ass for the last 4.5 weeks building this. We've had between 2 and 5 people working on this car essentially 7 days a week, and the last week and a half at least, most of those people have been working sort of 18-hour days. So, you know, for that amount of effort, the reward would at least be seeing the finish line. Last night, as I mentioned, we found that we were pushing water out of the overflow, and chances are that was going to be a head gasket, but we have had problems with bleeding the cooling system. So we were hopeful, as is everyone who has a leaking head gasket, that it was something simpler than the head gasket itself. And the first session, Ben went out on low boost and actually seemed really good. Coolant temp didn't get over about 78, but Ben wasn't also pushing that hard. I think the quickest lap he put in was a 107.2 or thereabouts. To put it in perspective, last year with the V8 in it, we did a best of I think a 104.4 in practice, and we were circulating around the 105s in the race itself. I went out and we sort of started off on the lowest boost, just got some heat into everything, checked the tyre pressures after a few laps, and I haven't done any laps here for about 12 months, so the first few laps were just finding my way around the track again. Done some laps on a set of course on the sim, but nothing really compares to the real world. After we checked the tyre pressures, went out and did a few push laps just on the low boost, and the car is insanely fast. It's really cool to drive, and it's just a completely different power delivery than the V8. So learning that, learning the characteristics of the engine, and learning what gears we want to be in at what part of the track, that's all changed as well. We're on a taller tyre, so the road speed versus engine RPM has changed. We've got more grip as well from the taller tyre, or the wider tyre, it's probably more important. And we've also got a different 6th gear. So yeah, first few laps back out onto the track was just really sort of feeling things out there. I started to push a little bit. I think I got down to a 104.2, there's so much more in it. That's still on that lowest boost setting, about 10 PSI as well. Braking way too early for a couple of key corners there, and just getting confidence in the car. Given that we've gone to a stiffer spring, we've gone to 14 kg springs all around. We were running 8 kg, then stepped up to 10. Much better on the 14 kg spring, but just again getting confidence in that whole setup has taken me a little bit of time. Coming to the pits, did another check of the tyre pressures. We're actually struggling because it is quite cold here to get heat into the tyres. Left rear as well, around this track being predominantly, it's an anti-clockwise track, the left rear doesn't get much of a workout, so it was probably a little bit lower than we'd ideally want it, but not really a huge issue. Given that we do want to test and see where we are with this potential head gasket problem, we did try higher boost settings, and straight away started to see the engine temperature climb up, which is a key indicator that something's not right. Did a couple more laps and really just wasn't comfortable with where the temperature was sitting, so decided to cool it. As soon as I came to the pits, noticed that it was running on 3 cylinders, which is never a good indication. So at this stage, my rough diagnosis, I'm guessing we probably have completely torched the head gasket. If we continue driving the car, which obviously I did, there is a risk that it's actually torched a channel through the head there as well, which really wouldn't be the dream. So we're trying to decide what we're going to do at the moment. We've got Barry pulling the plugs out so we get a better idea of what's going on inside the cylinder. Haven't actually even looked at the data yet, but once we've had a look at the plugs, that'll give us an idea what we're dealing with. Given that it is Friday morning here, it's about midday, and we've got the rest of the day of practice, we'll see if we can get locally another head gasket, and if we can, we'll at least pull the head off and see what we're dealing with. So hopefully, if everything goes our way, which it seldom does, let's be honest, we may have a chance of getting back out there and racing.
So a not so great end to that session. Andre's just been out, done quite a few laps, probably, I don't know, 15, 17, 18 minutes worth of running. Everything was looking pretty good until after he came in for a tyre pressure check, and then he started to notice that, that it was missing and a bit down on power. So he decided to cool it down and then bring it in. By the time it got back to the pits, it was puking milkshake from the overflow. Never something that you want to see. We have got a head gasket issue. So the boys are now currently whipping off the head, and we're going to see what it looks like under there. I've found a head gasket locally about 2 hours away, and it's second hand. It's already been in an engine, it's already been run, so would really be pushing shit uphill to install that and then get back to racing tomorrow.
Alright, not the news that I really wanted to bring you, but it's not good. I've got the cylinder head off and it's a bit of a shambles, so let's have a look. We'll actually start by looking at the turbocharger, which I was inspecting while the boys were removing the cylinder head, and that was kind of a sign of what we could expect to see. Let's check it out. Alright, so we can see here the tips of the turbine wheel not really looking how Garrett intended. Pretty melty, and that's purely come down to excessive exhaust gas temperature. You can also sort of get a hint of that by the coloration. Just you can see that it's quite white, sort of very light grey, sort of indicates the temperature. It's exactly the same thing with the turbine housing, which was my first sort of clue. It's looking in here, and again, pretty white. So that's a hint that something wasn't right. So yeah, not what we're going to see. That's certainly not going to help our spool up, which was already probably pretty marginal for what I wanted anyway. So let's have a look at the exhaust manifold and we'll see what has resulted in this. So we've got our Synco exhaust manifold here. This is the turbo flange obviously, but what we're really interested in is if we turn this over, we can see the port coloration. So this is number 1 cylinder, and we can see that's quite white in there. Come over to number 2, not quite so bad. Number 3 is looking pretty good, and number 4 pretty dark. So I've got definitely sort of a change in the coloration from the front to the back. Now we'll have a look at what we've got on the tops of the pistons. All right, so coming over here to the engine, we've got the head gasket off, but looking at the tops of the pistons, other than the amount of oil that's on number 2 and 3 here, 2, 3 and 4 actually looking pretty good. Number 1 is where all the funds occurred though, and we can see we've got a bit of a sprinkling of aluminium on the top of it. Never really a good sign. It actually hasn't melted the piston. There's nothing sort of ugly going on there, but this is obviously a sign of where our problems occurred. And we'll also have a look at the spark plug. There's a lot of talk about the use of spark plugs or reading spark plugs to help us with our tuning. And 100% there is a case for exactly this. Back in the older days where wideband air fuel ratio meters really weren't a thing or were horrendously expensive, this was the common technique. Definitely common with carburetors as well, but with EFI we don't tend to rely on it so much. Generally we want to rely on our wideband air fuel ratio meter, because even reading spark plugs we need to understand what we're looking for here. So first of all, when people talk about using plug reading to help with the tune, it has to be done in a very specific way. You want to start with a brand new set of plugs. You can't be using a set of plugs that's done 100,000 miles. You're not going to learn much from that. Also, you want to actually do what's referred to as a plug cut. So on the dyno, if we want to see what's happening to our air fuel ratio, maybe around about 4,500 RPM, we'll run the car hard under wide open throttle on a ramp run to 4,500, or even in steady state for that matter, and then literally just cut the ignition. And it's going to give us a reading of exactly what's happening. So most people will be trying to read plugs that have done 100,000 miles. They probably should have been replaced 20,000 miles ago anyway, and they've been driving around, idling, doing whatever you do in your road car. Then they take the plugs out and try and get some really meaningful data, and honestly, it's just not really going to happen. However, I still do use plug reading to back up what I'm seeing with my EFI tuning from the Motec data in terms of our knock control, in terms of our wideband air fuel ratio. One of the things I'm generally looking for is the coloration of the plug, giving me an indication of what's happening inside the cylinder, and I'm looking more at a variation cylinder to cylinder. So this means that I know if I've got a variation in my fueling. And this can be tricky with a single wideband air fuel ratio meter, because what we tend to see is an average of the 4 cylinders, in our case on our SR20. So we can have one cylinder that's a bit too rich, another cylinder that's a bit too lean, 2 that are spot on, and the average is actually going to come out right on our target, but we don't know we've got one lean cylinder. Now, in a road car or something that's not really making a huge amount of power, it's probably nothing to worry about, but as our power levels rise, getting one cylinder that's a little bit lean can start to be problematic. All right, now we've talked a little bit about the background on plug reading. Let's actually have a look at our plugs and see what we can tell. All right, so the first thing we can see here is number 1 plug. Obviously this is the source of our issue. It's purely blowing that ground strap completely away. Got a pretty good speckling on the plug itself as well from melted alloy, so not a good thing. Not what we want to see when we pull plugs. 2 and 3, not looking too bad. Number 4, this is probably looking a bit more like what I'd expect to see. Sort of a darkish grey going on towards black. So when we see this, when we pull the plugs, obviously we know we've got a pretty significant issue going on in there. Now there's a variety of reasons that can cause a plug to melt like this. You have a situation where the plug is too hot of a heat range and it can't physically get rid of the heat fast enough. That's not the case in our instance here. We're running a heat range 8 with an NGK plug. It's absolutely perfect for the 14 odd PSI peak boost we're seeing. E85, which runs cooler. We're running a reasonably safe, conservative mixture and timing as well. The other thing with this as well is if it was a plug heat range thing, we'd expect to see all of them being affected equally, and that's again clearly not the case. So we've got a relatively isolated incident. Number 1 is not good. Number 2, we're starting to see a few problems there. 3 and 4, pretty much where I'd expect. The next thing we can see a problem like this caused by detonation. So this is obviously a consideration here, but again, E85, the fact that we're only running about 14 PSI of boost peak, conservative air fuel ratio, we're around about 0.78, 0.79 lambda. I'm not going to convert that to air fuel ratio units for you because different people like to do this differently on E85. Most use the stoic air fuel ratio for pump gas. Conversation for a different day. 0.78, 0.79. You can do the math and figure that out on E85 depending on which stoic air fuel ratio you actually want to work with. Anyway, enough said there. Definitely pretty conservative for the boost levels and what we're doing. Timing's okay there as well. We're reasonably conservative, but the bigger issue there is on E85 with a 8.8 to 8.9 to 1 compression, which is where we're at. E85, we're probably not going to be able to actually make the engine knock on 14 PSI of boost. So I'd be very surprised if knock was an issue. We've also got knock data in the ECU, no knock events to speak of. And again, we'd expect if we're seeing significant knock, enough to blow one plug completely away like that, we'd probably be seeing signs of it on the other plugs. So that's not the issue. What we've got here is something that is heat related. Let's have a look at the cylinder head for a few more clues. All right, here we've got the cylinder head. This is a combustion chamber for number 1 cylinder, and obviously things are not looking too flash in there. These are the 2 exhaust valves here, and we can see it's created so much heat between the 2 exhaust valves that it's actually melted away the cylinder head, and that's caused the aluminium spatter that we can see on the top of the piston and the spark plug, and obviously the heat's been transferred into the spark plug as well, which is why the ground strap's been melted away. The rest of the head deck surface is actually looking pretty good. If we move over to number 2 cylinder, you can see we're just starting to see the very early signs of what we saw on number 1 cylinder. Interestingly, if we move over to number 3 and number 4, they're looking exactly what I'd expect. Nothing too ugly going on there. So that's the evidence that we've got to work from there. And it is really hard when you're analysing a terminal failure like this to really be specific about exactly what's happened. However, what we suspect is going on here is that we have a problem with the cooling system that's resulting in an airlock that's staying in the cylinder head. Now, what this does is it means that we're not getting cooling flow, water coolant flow around the combustion chamber. Now, what will happen with the way the water is moved through the engine by the water pump, that air pocket is most likely going to get pushed to the front of the engine around number 1 cylinder. So number 1, of course, gets superheated. It can't transfer the heat out of the combustion charge temperature into the cylinder head and then into the water. So the combustion charge temperature increases because it's not being cooled. The cylinder head temperature increases, and the cylinder head being made out of alloy, obviously the melting point of aluminium relatively low. Doesn't take a lot to figure out that the combustion temperature is much higher than the melting point of alloy. So without that cooling flow, the cylinder head's going to melt, which is exactly what we've seen. Now, because the combustion charge temperature is not being cooled, or not getting cooling to the combustion chamber, the combustion charge temperature increases. The knock-on effect of that is the exhaust gas temperature also increases. And that's what we saw there with the discoloration in the exhaust ports, and of course the damage to our turbocharger. So number 1 cylinder was severely affected. We're starting to see that going on number 2, 3 and 4, as we've already talked about. Absolutely perfect. Can't be 100% that is the situation, but it seems like the most likely scenario given the evidence that we're looking at right now. It's really unfortunate. The other problem here is that with circuit racing, because you are under high load for such a long period of time, any little issue like this is just going to end up being magnified. So we might have got away with this if it was a drag engine, maybe even for a drift event or something like this, where the engine's only under load for a relatively short period of time. Doesn't mean that we would have been okay, but the damage that we're seeing there is because I probably did 2 laps with this situation. Everything's getting superheated and number 1 cylinder just can't cope. Now, the frustrating thing with all of this is it could have been prevented. Even with the potential issue we've got with the cooling system, we actually could have prevented this if we'd had a little bit more time. The reason for this is that we have got data on this car for days, but given that we were working with a really tight time frame, I knew that it wasn't going to be feasible for us to get all of the sensors installed. On the exhaust manifold, we have got exhaust gas temperature and individual cylinder lambda sensors going on there. But again, I knew that Jimmy, our fabricator, wasn't going to get time to get those fitted, so I've wired for it. We've got a Haltech TCA8 thermocouple amplifier. That's sitting there, it's all wired, it's all tested, it all works. We don't have the EGTs physically fitted to the manifold yet. Now, if we had those, what we can do is essentially set up a warning message for the driver on the Motec C125 dash to bring the attention to the fact that the exhaust gas temperature is getting too high. Generally, I'd probably set that somewhere around about 950 to maybe 1000 degrees C. Much over 1000 degrees C, you're going to end up with damage to the turbine wheel of your turbocharger. Most turbine wheel materials won't manage sustained temperatures in that range for too long. So yeah, that would have brought our attention to, well, my attention, I was the one driving, to the fact that something wasn't right and could have backed off. Still, it is what it is. We only just got here anyway. The boys were still working at about 12:30 this morning, loading the car up onto the trailer. So fair to say, if Jimmy had taken another half day out to weld those bosses onto the manifold and do the rest of the small jobs associated with the EGTs, probably wouldn't be here in the first place. So yeah, it's a shame, but that is motorsport. The highs and lows of motorsport are brutal. Unfortunately, today's been a low, which is really disappointing given the amount of work that everyone has put in over the last 4.5 weeks getting this car here. There's been basically 7 days around the clock working, a team of at least 2 through to at some stages 5 people working on the car. It is insane how much time a car build of this nature just absorbs when you're trying to do things nicely. But we've been here before. I've been involved in motorsport for 20 plus years. I know what happens, and while right now I'm not particularly excited about the prospect of fixing the car, a couple of days off, a little bit of chance to regroup, to recuperate, get a bit of sleep, and we'll smash into it on Monday and figure out some solutions. I just want to finish up this vlog now that we have had a week or so of time to gather our thoughts, figure out exactly what's happened, and do a more detailed analysis of the failure that we've seen. And essentially what you need to understand as well, most of what we've said during the vlog still holds true. This is being filmed during a race meeting where we're quite time poor, so everything's always a little bit clearer with the benefit of hindsight. The time since the race meeting's also given me the opportunity to run everything past a few of my other industry colleagues and get a few different perspectives, and this has given us the opportunity to get a clearer idea of exactly what's happened. And the situation, we believe, has still been a result of the cooling system issue. Now, this becomes a bit of a what came first, the chicken or the egg situation. It still looks to me that the situation has come from the head gasket leaking. That in itself is a little unusual given the relatively low boost levels we're running, but that looks like what we've been facing. So basically that's pushed water out, leaving a lot of air in the cooling system, and that's done exactly what I explained during the vlog. What we think though has actually occurred is because the spark plug, which failed first, hasn't been able to get rid of that heat back into the combustion chamber, it's ended up melting. Basically that becomes a glow plug. It's glowing red hot in the combustion chamber, and this leads to an abnormal type of combustion called pre-ignition. And pre-ignition, as its name implies, this actually starts before the ignition event. So it's a little bit different to knock or detonation, which happens after the spark event initiates combustion. The problem with pre-ignition is that it's actually a lot more damaging than knock, and this is why initially I kind of disregarded pre-ignition occurring. Let's have a look at a piston from an engine that has actually suffered pre-ignition. This is a piston out of one of our 4G63 drag engines, and we can see the damage to it is pretty catastrophic, and this is normally what we see with pre-ignition. In particular, you can see the depression in the top of the crown there caused by the extreme heat that the piston has been enduring. Obviously that's ended up escalating with the side melting out of the piston, and all of this happens within just a few engine cycles. You don't get to live through pre-ignition for very long. Given that at the track, the top of number 1 piston really wasn't showing any damage at all. There was the aluminium spattering on the crown, but that came from the cylinder head. So at that point, I really was disregarding pre-ignition. Detonation definitely wasn't occurring. There's no sign of that sandblasting that we see from detonation. The reality is, though, pre-ignition almost certainly is what we're encountering, and probably the only reason that the piston lived through this was just given to the relatively modest amount of power that the engine was producing at the time. Now, that explains the damage to the spark plug, it explains the damage to the combustion chamber, but the other mystery that we had was the damage to the turbine wheel of the turbocharger. Given that I completed probably the better part of a full lap of the racetrack with absolutely no combustion occurring in number 1 cylinder, what we had was a situation which you could liken to anti-lag on steroids. Basically, we were still pumping through a complete cylinder's worth of unburned fuel and air from number one because the ECU was still pouring fuel into that cylinder. Obviously, it wasn't combusting. There was no spark plug left. So this is after all of that damage had occurred. So the fuel and air is going straight out into the exhaust manifold, where it's going to be ignited probably most likely in the manifold or on that hot turbine wheel, and that produces basically the anti-lag effect. And given that I was at full throttle for, again, the better part of a lap, it's a long time for this damage to occur. So again, it's very difficult to be absolutely pinpoint accurate with what's going on, but with the benefit of hindsight, we believe that that's the situation that has occurred. It doesn't make the damage any less expensive to fix. It doesn't make us any happier about the situation, but this is where we're at, and ultimately it is what it is. The other situation I want to clear up before we get roasted in the comments is the boost levels that we chose to run. Now, as I said at the beginning of the vlog, and this still holds 100% true, ultimately all we wanted to do was circulate and finish. And you might be thinking, well, if that's the case, then why did you raise the boost? Fair enough, let's talk about that. The lowest boost setting we had is 10 PSI. Now, that is literally nothing. Yes, the engine was making reasonably good power at 10 PSI, but that 10 PSI setting was really there for a situation where the racetrack was wet and we needed to reduce the engine power and torque to make the car more drivable. So we weren't expecting to be competitive at all, or even really in the field with that 10 PSI on a dry racetrack. So ultimately we needed to know, is there a problem with the head gasket, or did we have a problem with the cooling system being bled up? So that's why during my stint I did raise the boost to our set point 2. Now that set point 2 is only 14 PSI. We're not getting crazy here. Remember, on the dyno we tuned all the way up to 20 PSI at set point 4, and then with the party mode that took it up to 24 PSI. So we're still being as sensible as we could while we're testing this out. 14 PSI is certainly not pushing this engine at all, and that's probably about the boost level we expected we're going to need to run to at least be in the field on a dry racetrack. So that's why we went through that process. Next question you might have is, well, the car wasn't overheating during Ben's stint on low boost. Why did it overheat when I was driving it on boost setting 2? Was it the boost setting? Hard to say. Chances are though, probably not. When Ben went out on the track was still a little bit damp and drying. It wasn't raining, but just a little bit of dew overnight, and that was the first session in the morning. So the track was definitely slippery. It was also incredibly cold. Also cold slick. So Ben was just basically feeling out the track, and he really never pushed the car that hard. Again, I think the best lap time he did was in the 107, so not indicative of the sort of load that the car was going to see during a hard lap, which is exactly what I put it through, getting down into the low 104s. So with the car being pushed harder, more consistently lap after lap during my stint, that's when we started to see the temperature increase. So the question is, would it have held together if we only ran 10 PSI? Ultimately, we will never know, but there's just a little bit more context around the decisions we made and why we made them.
If you like that video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you're not already a subscriber, make sure you're subscribed. We release a new video every week. And if you like free stuff, we've got a great deal for you. Click the link in the description to claim your free spot to our next live lesson.